This is the Bell Books and Stories podcast with your host, Kay Hutchison. Welcome. You're listening to the Bell Media podcast, where we take a look at some great books and the stories behind the books. Before I introduce today's special guest, a reminder of some of the other episodes in the Bell Books and Stories series, like Helen Lederer on her book Losing It and her Comedy Women in Print Awards. John Lunn talks about the book of his unforgettable Downton Abbey music. We interviewed Stanley Johnson on his timely thriller The Virus, and producer-director Kate Sinclair on the story of Slumdog Millionaire and The Miniaturist and how the books made the transition from book to screen. And we also talked to John Preston, author of The Dig and A Very English Scandal, whose latest book, Fall, looks at the jaw-dropping life story of Robert Maxwell. Richard was himself involved in the running of one of Maxwell's businesses, was working there when Maxwell died, and he witnessed the dramatic events in the months that followed. It makes for an absorbing conversation. In this episode, I'm speaking to someone who has worked in a somewhat hidden part of the publishing industry, where literature intersects with film and TV. She has worked behind the scenes for some of the biggest producers from LA to Sydney to London, constantly on the lookout for the best stories to reimagine as TV series or film. Some of the producers she has worked with have been involved with Harry Potter, The Handmaid's Tale, Picnic at Hanging Rock, My Brilliant Friend, Brittania, as well as The Walking Dead. My guest is an expert literary scout. What does this role actually involve? Why is it so often behind the scenes? And what are the thrills and the less thrilling aspects of this fascinating area of work? I'm delighted to welcome Philippa Donovan. Philippa, thanks for being with me today.
Hello, nice to be here.
Good. Well, I want to just start right off by helping people understand what you do. I mean, as a literary scout, who do you actually work for? Is it producers, directors, screenwriters, publishers?
It's mainly producers. It's sort of interfacing between producers and literary agents and publishers on the other side. So often I sort of describe it as an act of translation, because obviously the language of film and TV is really specific, and as is the language of publishing. And it's always fascinating to me, the sort of room for interpretation. It's fundamentally the same mechanics that we're talking about, but we call them different things. So quite a lot of my job is, as I say, sort of translating from one language to the other and then back again.
And it is a part of the industry that doesn't seem to get much recognition, or at least not many people know about it. Why is that?
I mean, personally, I feel like there's a lot of humility that goes along with scouting. I mean, in film and TV generally, recognition is sort of the way the industry is set up. Hence the fact you have sort of those reams of executive producers and producers in the credits of sort of any kind of series or any film. And scouting is sort of known to be, you go into it knowing that you're going to be working behind the scenes. You're not doing it to get a credit or acknowledgement as a rule. So it's always been, I think, because it's interfacing. As I say, it's neither publishing nor film and TV. We work between those two areas so specifically that we can't really align with one or the other, and therefore it has to be a certain amount of confidentiality. You need to be able to trust your scout entirely. That's such an important part of the work, is the trust that you form with the producers. Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting for me. I'm kind of wondering though, if it's very much behind the scenes, how do you get your next work? Are you just well known, but kind of almost in a kind of parallel universe, as it were?
Yeah, it's pretty much exclusively word of mouth. So within the scouting community, we all know each other. And so producers tend to sort of ask their own scouts, I know someone who's now looking for a scout, can you recommend something? So it is sort of all based on referral, which is really nice actually, because it feels like client lists and portfolios sort of evolve in this really organic fashion, which is quite pleasing actually.
So you work for producers mainly, and you translate between publishing and producing. So how would you describe the actual work itself? Are you looking for it's books or authors or both?
It's both. In the first instance, it tends to be sort of remit based. So, for example, if a producer's specifically looking at an area of interest broadly, they could be looking at crime and thrillers, or they could be looking for Regency romances, which understandably are huge at the moment, thanks to Bridgerton. So I'm sort of exploring kind of those bulk areas. And then, as I say, sort of based on that sort of trust and that relationship, I can then refine and refine and refine the sort of books that I know will light them up. It's something that they are looking for in terms of their slate, but also in terms of the writers and the directors that they work with directly. I'm able to sort of facilitate the IP a bit further for those endpoints as well. So it's the producer in the first instance, but then it sort of becomes more outward from that, even onto other people they want to work with, including casts as well. So it gets very interesting the more you work for a producer.
And in terms of the numbers of titles and projects you're dealing with, I mean, are you providing lots of recommendations, or are you focusing down on a small number that you feel will definitely have the potential to be on the screen eventually?
It sort of depends, really. It depends what stage of the optioning process the producer is at. So if they haven't optioned many books, I try and keep it rather sort of broad and numerous. But if the relationship is sort of further along and they have a really sort of clear idea what it is that they want sort of now and in the future, then as I say, I can kind of really hone the number of titles I put in front of them. So it depends what they're looking for, and as I say, what stage of the process they're at.
And are you involved in the actual bidding when it gets to that stage where you've put these two sets of people together and there's real interest? So is that the point at which you take a back step, or?
It used to be. It used to be the point at which when numbers started flying around, I would sort of elegantly exit the stage left. But increasingly, what's happening, of course, with these sort of huge streamers is that the money for book to film and TV is a lot more than it used to be, and very competitive auction situations are increasingly the norm. So I feel like my producers rely on me a lot more in terms of financials and numbers and getting those aspects together before they actually go back to the rights holder, to the agent or the publisher or whoever it is. I do feel like I'm much more involved than I used to be at a sort of later stage.
And that must be good for you in a way, because it's probably an expertise that you'd built up over the years, but not actually been involved with. But presumably that means that your role is actually even more valued, and perhaps that means you're remunerated even more.
I mean, it's all sort of part of the service, really. But I have to say, I find it intellectually fascinating because, as I say, I've never really been. I mean, before in past life, I was involved in sort of offers and negotiations and contracts when I was commissioning for a publisher, and also when I worked for a literary agency. So it's nice to be involved in that stage again because it is exciting. The point where you're getting close to agreeing an option and knowing that that property is yours, something you've worked really hard for and that you're really passionate about bringing to screen. It's a privilege to be involved with that, to sort of
Mm.
and there's a closeness to it again, that sort of, as I say, that trust evolves even further, that the producers know they can really rely on you and that you're sort of protecting their interests.
I'm going to ask you about what you describe, what you do day to day, but I'm sort of thinking as you're describing how things are changing, that perhaps I've always regarded this as quite a slow job with maybe one or two successes, but maybe it's becoming a lot busier. Just that the market is becoming more hungry for product to go on the screen. So perhaps it's a really expanding area. But has the speed and the number of potential stories books actually increased, or is it increasing in your view?
Yeah, it's absolutely exploded. I mean, it was sort of exploding anyway with the streamers coming online, but added to that the pandemic and the fact that everybody is locked indoors and producers sort of see it as a sort of, we're a captive audience. They need IP, and books are such a legitimate source because the world is completely fully formed and ready to go, as opposed to screenplays are absolutely brilliant, but sometimes you have the idea and then you have to go and write the screenplay, whereas the book's already there. It's all laid out for you. The blueprint is established. So it's absolutely ferocious at the moment. The auctions are ferocious. There is a lot more material flying around. There's more agents. There's more submissions. There's more to. I mean, scouting was always quite a big and stressful job. I used to do it about 10 years ago for foreign rights publishers. So I'd read everything in the English market and then tell the French and the Germans and the Russians and the Koreans what they should buy from the English market. And within that, we had one film and TV client as well. And the reading was just interminable. I mean, it just went on and on and on. You could never get across the number of books that were being published or that were being sent out by literary agents. But I think it's probably, and even the editors and sort of publishing are saying that they're getting just such a volume of books submitted. I think also because people have been writing in lockdown. A lot of people have been writing.
Yes, everyone I know is writing.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just going to ask, though. I think it's quite important to get back to the nuts and the bolts. So, could you tell me, what do you actually do? So, are you sitting there with hundreds of books? What is the role? Because I think a lot of people would be fascinated and interested in what you're doing, but have no idea how you go about it.
Right. So a lot of it is conversations with agents and other people in the industry about, to a certain extent, what they're reading and what they're liking that's been published. But really, scouts have to work a bit earlier than that. So it's more about what's on submission, what publishers are thinking about acquiring, what everyone is excited about in that capacity. So, based on those conversations and sort of various other outlets that I sort of have access to, I have an idea of what I think is exciting and what I think has potential for adaptation, what I think my clients might be interested in. And then I'll go out and I'll source that material. So, that means effectively pulling in a lot of PDFs that then sit on my desktop and need to be read. And I sort of prioritize them and I sort of decide, sort of which books might be interesting for which clients. And within that, I do a sort of scouts all work differently, but I do monthly updates for my clients. So they'll get sort of an update once a month about books that I think in the market that I think are interesting or selling well. And then anything I might have read, I do sort of coverage. So there's the sort of title hunting on the one side and there's the reading on the other.
And in a typical month, how many books do you actually read through?
If I'm reading full speed, I can get through 2 in a day, but that's not really sustainable. 7 days a week, so that, sort of 14 books a week, which I guess what's that? Sort of 60 books a month.
I understand that you did have quite a stressful time one London book fair. You can tell me about that story.
Well, it was, so you have the spring book fairs that all come together. So there's the Bologna book fair, which is for children in Italy. It's so lovely, and that used to be sort of in March. And then you'd have London book fair straight after. So there were two back-to-back fairs, which sort of doubles the amount of work that you have to do. And I ended up reading idiotically when I look back on it. It was a very early e-reader, and it corrupted the file and made it very grey and very faint. So instead of putting it down like a sensible person, I read cross-eyed. I read it with it up to my nose for 6 hours. I remember the book as well. It was a really great book. It was called Genesis by Bernard Beckett. And then I could not open my eyes for a month. My eyes sort of locked in that position. And I had such terrible eye strain that I was unable to kind of refocus. I mean, it was terrifying at the time.
That's the trouble. You were ahead of the curve, even in terms of the technology, weren't you?
That's the thing. We were all so excited about this new I mean, as a result, I absolutely will not read on a Kindle. I just can't. I have such a sort of traumatic response to e-readers,
Mm.
but I'm fine reading PDFs on screen.
So that's quite a large number of books. And do you also need media experience? You've actually been described as an excellent editor with an eye for compelling story and vision to create an unforgettable package. So that says to me that you have many, many different sets of expertise. Do you actually need media experience to bring all of those together as well?
Yes, I think it helps, but it comes as part of as part of the territory, really. You can't help but pick up the media experience sort of based on the conversations and the people that you work with. So I sort of feel like it's a relatively natural thing that you pick up the media experience as you go, and that sort of helps to sort of heighten the way in which you report to clients and what you report to clients.
And this unforgettable package, what could that mean to the layperson?
I've been trying to think who on earth said that. It's a lovely comment. I'm very flattered. I mean, I suppose that's sort of referring to vision. So obviously, when you're reading a book just for a book's sake, that's quite a linear experience of text. And I think that when I'm reading, it's actually quite interesting because obviously I edit, but then I sort of read for the producers as well. And sometimes when I'm editing, I can feel my scouting mind working, which means I sort of will gloss over things, and I have to kind of recorrect myself and sort of think, no, actually, I'm critiquing this. I need to say what's wrong.
So can I just wind back there? So when you say you're reading, but you're also editing, are you doing two roles at the same time often for a client? So are you editing as well as scouting?
A little bit, a little bit. I mean, I feel like sort of my editorial background really feeds into the way I scout. I can't help it. When I read a book, I'm thinking, what's right with this and what's wrong with it? It's just my natural response to a text. So when I'm reading a book for a producer, if the dialogue is weak, that is something that I will be putting in my coverage.
And when you're doing that critique, I mean, are you thinking, oh, this is easily fixed, but the big story is there? And so actually, to me, it looks as if you're doing a number of different things all at the one time. The editing, the working out whether this is something you can work with, whether it would make something brilliant on screen. But how much of that is actually your expertise and how much is gut feel?
I think it's probably a mix. As I say, it feels very natural to me when I read to be thinking visually, how is this going to convert? And what are the weaknesses in a possible conversion? And are those weaknesses something you could fix? Because, I mean, that is very much sort of part of the process of adaptation, that if there's any sort of weakness in the underlying text, you can address it in the act of adaptation, which is one of the reasons I absolutely love this area and I'm passionate about it, because what you get is underlying narrative structure. And I'm absolutely bananas about narrative structure. It's my favorite thing to talk about. And so the fact you use that when assessing something for film and TV, and that ends up sort of honestly being the deciding factor a lot of the time. What is the underlying narrative structure? Is it weak? Is it strong? Where are the fault lines? And how can you sort of steady it up like a building? What sort of scaffolding is required to make it stand, to make that story stand? So I think it's probably a bit gut feeling and then a bit experience.
I'm really fascinated by this aspect of having to really cover absolutely everything and come at projects both from a client's perspective, but also you're looking out for books that are just great books that maybe no one's heard of yet. But last year, on September the 3rd, The Guardian reported that there were almost 600 new books published on the big pre-Christmas launch day, which was the 3rd of September. And that was a third up on the number of books from the previous year. And I can tell, as you've just been confirming, that the market is already just booming and becoming more so. So how on earth does someone like you keep up with all of that noise and make some sense of it? Are there any shortcuts or go-to authors or types of stories that you just know, and so therefore you can really sift things so that you don't go crazy with thousands of books?
Yes, I mean, I think part of the advantage of having done this for such a long time is that I am able to see through noise, and there are a lot of genres that are not going to work for producers. So being able to, like, I mean, what we often get are these rights guides from publishers and from agents, which are a kind of a roundup of every single title that they are either representing or publishing for a season. And the rights guides can be 100 pages, and they must just be so overwhelming to people that aren't able to, so I look at an author and I know I've read sort of 3 of theirs in the past, and I know exactly what they're about. So there's that sort of immediate orientation, that immediate, I'm able to sort of navigate those documents very quickly and whiz through them and sort of know exactly the books that are going to jump out and be and potentially be something for me to look at. So, I mean, as I say, it is exponentially, in terms of wealth of material, it's going up. There is a lot more than there used to be. So it's a bigger job than it used to be, but there are absolutely ways that I can navigate it. And that is mainly due to the fact I've been doing it for a long time. So I sort of know what to look for.
How many years have you been doing?
So I've been working in publishing for 22 years now. Started at a literary agency, then went and started scouting. Then I worked for a publisher, and then I came back to scouting and editing sort of, for myself.
You must have seen something that I find extremely challenging, actually, and as well as interesting, is the changes in tastes and what's acceptable. And we haven't really talked about this, but I think The Dig, which is a film that's just come out and it's probably going to do very well, which John Preston, one of our other guests, actually wrote. I think it was something like 2004 or 6 or something when that book came out, and it's only just made it to the screen now. But given the fact that it takes ages for these projects to come to fruition, but also tastes are changing over time. Look at the emphasis on diversity and language and culture, and surely how can you accommodate the fact that things are changing when you've got such a long period of time between you finding something and it actually making it to the screen?
I think that's actually where a kind of intense understanding and love of narrative structure really helps, because you reference those sort of titles that have obviously gone on to be very successful adaptations, and it's about the treatment, and it makes that book that was maybe published 10 or 20 or 30 or even longer years ago highly relevant to a modern audience. And so, I mean, you look at something like The Favourite, which is about Queen Anne, but the way that that is depicted feels so current and so relevant. That even the Queen's Gambit that was published in the 1980s, and yet this
Mm.
story of this young woman kind of taking on a very sort of masculine sphere is highly pertinent to how we operate today. And I feel like that's the test. If the bones of the book itself are sound, it doesn't matter if tastes shift and change, because in adaptation, you'll be able to pull something out for the audience now that they can relate to.
That's very interesting. So, coming back to the rise of Netflix and Amazon and all these others entering screen production, in what ways do you think it will change your role? And I think also, is this going to be more opportunity for UK authors and stories?
Yes, they're very acquisitive, these streamers, and they need current, constantly updated content. So there is capacity, there is demand, and whilst many of them are based in the US, what I absolutely love about sort of this current situation is that they are so internationally focused. These big streamers, they're not looking at American stories for an American audience. It is so far beyond that, and I feel like it's a real privilege to be working in the industry at the moment, because it means that I'm looking at stories set in Africa and Scandinavian stories and authors who live in Germany, and I've got people who are asking about terribly exotic territories and stories from voices we haven't heard before. It's there's such an expansiveness to the sort of IP that they're looking at, and that kind of it's sort of truly inspiring, as I say, to be working in that industry. But that's being driven by the streamers. So I feel like UK authors, there's all the opportunities are there. All the opportunities are there, as they are for anyone. It feels like it's so inclusive. That's what I absolutely love about it.
I mean, I think I've had a mixed experience. I mean, some things I think are absolutely fantastic. Other things are not such good quality. So, do you think we will see? I don't know. I'm just sort of thinking that 20 years ago there would be a certain way of doing things, and now, as you say, things are much more diverse. But do you also think that we're getting to the stage where we're also having to make sure that the quality is absolutely top notch?
Yes, and I do feel like the fact that it's such a competitive world at the moment is sort of pushing everyone to deliver higher and higher quality. So no one can kind of rest on the laurels of their past successes. There is this sort of there's a lot more being invested in terms of time and creative resources and money to really heighten the quality of the adaptations that we're seeing.
And I mean, I'm thinking about the most thrilling aspects of your job, because it does sound to me like quite a challenging job in a way, because you have so much to do on your own, in the privacy of your own workspace, and then you're expected to deliver. But once that's over, I'm sort of thinking, are there exciting aspects to your job beyond what you've described? And you clearly love what you do. I mean, do you get to go and see the sets of some of the things that you've been involved with in the early stages?
No, I don't. I mean, I'm sure. I'm sure I'd be invited, but if I asked, but I mean, I sort of relish my role of working behind the scenes. I if they want me to be there and see kind of the eventualities of the discussion that we've been having sort of years before, then happily I would go. But I mean, I do absolutely love my job, and I find it so enjoyable to kind of read and assess and critique and think about how something might work, and the number of characters and what the character traits are that might appeal or not appeal in terms of garnering an audience in interest. So I feel like my job's really enjoyable as it is. Like, I don't really need any more sweeteners.
Yes, you're happy as you are. And if I was to say to you, someone wanting to be a scout or an aspiring literary scout, is there a typical route? What would your advice be to someone who wanted to be someone like you?
I think sort of getting into any role in publishing is key, and ideally really actually not starting with another scout. So I think what's really helpful for me in terms of scouting is that I've had experience working for a literary agency, working for a publisher. So I've seen all sides of the industry, and that helps with contacts as well, and who knows you and where you can call information from. If you sort of start working as a junior in one of the sort of bigger scouting agencies, then you pick up the contacts that they already have, as opposed to that sort of sort of cross pollination effectively. So, but basically, get in any way you can,
Yes.
at any level you can, and work like mad and read like crazy. That's all you
Yes,
really
be
need to do.
fast.
Yeah.
able to read things fast.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you a favourite adaptation of It doesn't need to be something you've been involved with, but a favourite adaptation over the last few years that's close to the book or even better than the book?
Which is interesting what people say more often now. Sort of 10 years ago, there was always, oh, the book was better than the film. The book was always better than the film. But actually, there's been such a shift, and now people say it was better than the book. I mean, that's a real mark of the sort of quality and the seriousness and the devotion with which producers treat source material. As I say, I just love working for them and helping bring these sort of projects to the market. So in terms of adaptations that I personally have loved, there are many. Oldies but goodies. Friday Night Lights has just always been sort of so dear to me. I just loved that adaptation. And then more recently, I thought Good Omens that Amazon did was an absolute triumph. It was so wry and witty and sardonic and so close to the original text as well, which I loved. Wolf Hall was just divine. I'm actually currently watching My Brilliant Friend, HBO, and those books were extraordinary, and they've been treated with such love.
That's very reassuring,
Oh,
isn't it,
it's
for
just a
someone that,
joy.
yeah.
Exactly. That, there's such respect for the books in terms of adaptation. So yeah, those I've absolutely. I also loved Game of Thrones. I thought that was triumphant.
Yes, well, it was in many ways, wasn't it? Really. I'm going to ask you a last question. It's slightly cheeky, but knowing as you do what makes a perfect TV or film story and script, and being an expert editor, are you tempted to write something yourself, which you just know will be really successful, and you clearly have every possible contact you could possibly need in order to give something the best shot? Maybe you already are, but I'm just curious.
I'm not. I'm laughing because I'm not. Because it's really interesting. I have no desire to write. It's just not. It's not what I'm good at. I love reading, and that's the way my brain works. And I just don't feel like, so even if I saw there was a gap somewhere that could be filled, I'd be more likely to tell someone that's a gap and say, go away and write it, and then I'll and then I'll edit it, or I'll put it in front of someone that might be able to help. But writing it myself, sort of, I'm more of a deconstructor than a constructor, I'm afraid.
Well, what a wonderful place to close. It's actually brilliant to be talking with someone who's found your calling, really, and just enjoying it so much, and not looking for anything else, but saying, no, this is the right thing for me. It's actually very, very lovely to hear. Philippa, thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. It's an area most of us never really hear about, and therefore wonderful to have your insight. And I think next time we're all sitting down watching and critiquing the latest treat on screen, I think we'll be thinking about you and the sort of work that goes on before we see these wonderful things on screen.
Thank you. It's lovely to talk to you. I just love my job. Anyway, it's probably very obvious.
And so it just remains for me to thank you for listening to the Bell Books and Stories podcast. And do keep an eye out for the release of our latest audiobook, which you've probably heard me talking about before. Bill Patterson's uniquely recognisable voice brings a warmth and authority to the narration of Hurricane Hutch. So I hope you will get a chance to hear that soon. Today's studio production was by Perrin Sledge, and I'm Kay Hutchison. Please join me next time, and in the meantime, bye for now.